Hello and welcome to Million Labs. In this video, we are going to talk about the Design tab. Let's get started. So as you can see, the Design tab is over here. When we select it, we can see all the design features or elements we can add to a page. Each of the elements, when selected, brings up its own property editor. For instance, if we add a button to the page like this, we can see that when it is selected, we can see the property editor for that specific element. In order to build responsively, which simply means making your designs look good on different device sizes, we cannot simply add elements to the page like I just did. Instead, we need to create some page structure first, primarily by dividing the page into groups and then adding elements into those groups. We will look at how to build responsively more in another video. As an aside, Bubble is likely to release a new version of its software within the next year, which will make building responsibly easier. The Group button, which we will use a lot to help make sure our design is responsive, is located down here in the Container section. So looking at the Design tab, you can see there are two subtabs, a UI Builder tab and a Responsive tab. We are going to look at the UI Builder tab first. When you first look under the UI Builder tab, you are going to see some main headings like Element Tree and Visual Elements. The tabs within the UI Builder will be expanded to start, but if you want, you can close them. So for instance, we can close the Visual Elements tab, the Containers tab, the Input Forms, the Reusable Elements, and the Element Templates. By doing so, it may be easier for us to find things. If we want a little bit more space on the page, we can even close the elements within the Design tab themselves. Now, we don't want to do that at this moment because we want to show you things, so let's reopen those. To do that, we simply click on this arrow, and in this case, we want to look a little bit more at Visual Elements, so we'll expand that. Now, looking at the Visual Elements components, we can see we can add text, a button, an icon, a link, an image, a shape, an alert, a video, HTML, a map, and a built-on Bubble clickable logo. You can also install more visual element options to build with by adding plugins. That's where this Install More comes in. So if we click on it, you will see that the plugins feature comes up. Some of the plugins or tools are built by Bubble themselves, and some are offered by third parties. Every time you add a plugin, you potentially make your app run a little slower, so Bubble helps your app run its fastest by starting your build with only the essential visual elements to start. If you add plugins to an app, but then find you don't need them, remember to delete them to improve the speed of your app. Closing the visual elements, let's next look at the input forms. To make it easier to understand what these do, we are going to put these on the page and preview them. So for instance, we're going to add an input, multi-line input. Now that we've gone ahead and put a bunch of the different input forms on our page and text boxes, just so we understand what we're calling things, we can go ahead and preview them. Now that we can see the preview mode, we can see what our user sees. So let's have a look at the different inputs from a user perspective. First of all, I have an input, which is a single line input. So for instance, as a user, I could do something like a title. Then I have a multi-line input. Here I can add multi-lines of text versus single lines of text like the single input. So for instance, you can see that I can put in lots of different text. Next, I have a checkbox. So as a user, I might be asked a question and I can either choose to agree with the statement or not agree with the statement. Next, I have the dropdown. So as a user, I can select nothing or one of the choices that is offered to me. So for instance, in this case, I am going to choose option 2, choice 2. Looking at the radio buttons, as a user, I can choose one of these. Next, I have a date and time picker. Here, I can make a selection in a calendar. Then I see a file uploader. Here I can click to add a file. Looking at some more inputs, I can see that I can upload a picture with the picture uploader like this. Again, I can choose a file and I can select open. I can see that with the picture uploader, once the picture is uploaded, I can actually see the image. Whereas if I look at the file uploader, I can only see the name of the file. In terms of other inputs, so again, looking at the other inputs, I can see that there's a slider input, where as a user, I can make a selection on it. And there's a search box. With a search box, you are letting a user type in something, and then you are usually displaying some results in something else. If we close the Preview tab, we are brought back to the bubble editor like this. The last item in the input forms is Install More. Again, you can upload additional plugins to increase the number of types of input forms you have to work with. Let's close the input forms next, and let's move on to talking about the containers. So the containers are up here. As mentioned, when you first start creating your page, you will typically want to divide your page into groups contained in the container section, as any elements placed within these particular groups or containers can have their spacing and size more easily controlled. This becomes important to build responsively. Let's look at an example. As you can see, I have a new page. On the page, I have two examples. In the first example, I have put elements on the page, but not used any groups. I have added a shape element, a text element here, here, and here, and a button element. In the second example, I have also used the same elements as above, so a shape button, text, 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 and a button element, but I have also used groups. All of the elements are grouped in this larger group, which is light pink. I have grouped all of the text together in this sort of purpley blue color. I have then also added a spacer group, which is in this dark pink. We can preview this page to see what the user sees by selecting Preview. We're going to go ahead and select Preview right now. You can see that a new tab opened up with the page. We can then look at the page on different devices by using the browser's developer tools. In this case, we will use Chrome developer tools. So to access the developer tools, I click on those three little dots, I click More Tools, and then I click Developer Tools. You will see this page and this page display. We will close the first one down, and now we are looking at the responsive settings. As we can see, example 1 and example 2 look very similar, if not exactly the same, when we are on a bigger screen, so an iPad Pro with 1024 pixels. However, when we go down to an iPad, we can see that things have moved in directions we do not want. So we can see this line is now on 2 lines, and that these text elements are now all over the place. This is not what we want, and that's why we want to use groups. Groups keep everything neat and tidy. We now are going to go back into the bubble editor to look more at containers. So in terms of adding any element to a page, including groups, you have two options. So let's look at them. Option 1 is dragging and dropping. So if, for instance, I want to use a group, I can go over to Group, I can click and hold down my mouse, I can drag the item over to my page, and then I can unclick or release my mouse. And now I see the element on the page. I then need to move it wherever I want, and I also need to resize the element. Option 2, so we'll delete this first. Option 2 is that I go over to Group, I click on the group, I release my mouse, I then drag my mouse back over to the page, I see a plus sign instead, I click down on my mouse, I hold, I expand to whatever area I want, also to whatever spot I want, and I let go. Now that we have reviewed how to add any element, including a container, to a page, let's go over the different types of containers. First, we have a group. Let's go ahead and add a group to our page. So to do that again, I can click, I can select the size and area I want. In this case, I can do this. and then I can let go. We also showed you that second method. To make working with groups easier, we want to be able to visualize them. Now what we can see is when I have the group selected, it's easy to see, but when we click off it, I can't actually see it. So there are two ways we can deal with this. First of all, we can go to Grids and Borders, and we can select Show Element Borders. Now, when I haven't selected something, I can still see a gray outline. The second option to make visualizing groups easier is to use styles. Select your group and double-click to see your property editor. Then scroll down to see your styles. Your master styles can be selected or added to here. So in this case, if I click down to see what I have, I see all the styles I have in my master styles. And another way to get into master styles is actually to go to this other tab, and that's another way to see them. So going back over here, I'm bringing this back up and scrolling back down. So in this case, I'm going to select the wireframe style, which is part of my master styles. The reason you generally want to work with master styles is to save time. When you make a change to a master style, the style is automatically updated everywhere it was used in your app. Let's say, for instance, that you want to change a font. Without using master styles, you would have to find each instance of that font being used and then manually changing it. Going into your master styles instead and making a couple of quick changes that automatically update your app everywhere else is much faster. So using styles is an easy way to see groups. Many different types of elements can be put inside your group. So for instance, we can add different visual elements. In this case, let's go ahead and add a quick button inside of our group. Next, you can also add different types of input forms. In this case, let's go ahead and we're just going to drop an input form here. You can also add a repeating group. So again, we're going to click and add. Now, one important thing to notice is as I was doing this, a red box came up as I was dragging these elements around. You need to make sure that red box shows up and that you are putting your new element inside of the group properly. If this doesn't happen, you will notice that the items you wanted to be contained in your group actually aren't. So for instance, in this case, we can see these two items are contained and everything's moving around nicely together. If, however, I didn't quite get it inside, you'll notice that the button isn't actually in my group. So this will be important to make sure things are working the way you want. Working with groups makes it easier to create responsive products. You can also make it easier to show and hide information, as you can show or hide a whole group, similar to working with a PowerPoint presentation. The next type of container we're going to talk about is a repeating group. We've already gone ahead and built this. We're now going to explain it. So a repeating group is a special kind of container for lists. So as you can see, I have a list of information here. I have 3 cells, but what's really neat about repeating groups is I only need to design the first cell, and after that, the cells repeat themselves. So basically, with my repeating group, I first tell it what type of data it wants to have, and then I add elements to it. In this case, I've added an image, I've added some text, and I've added an icon. And then again, this information will repeat. We will talk about how to properly set up repeating groups in its own video, but for now, we just want you to understand it's for lists and that you only need to put information into the first cell. So again, with the repeating group, it's important that when you are putting information in that first cell, it's actually going in. So you need to watch for that little bit of a red line. Otherwise, information won't go where you want it. We quickly go ahead and preview this. First, we can see there's an update. So we always just enter if that's the case. We can see we've got a repeating group, which looks like a list. In this case, we've added a border, we've added an image, a text, and an icon, and those repeat in each of the lines. Continuing to look at containers, after groups and repeating groups, you can see pop-ups. A pop-up is a group that pops to the front of your app, while also providing a full screen overlay to the background of your app. Let's take a look. So if I click on pop-up, And again, I'm going to make my pop-up this big. I can see that it does exactly that. I can see a group at the front, which is overlaid against the back of my screen. Pop-ups are great for alerts, and when you want to show users a new screen they have to interact with. So for instance, right now I can see I have a white pop-up and a background behind that pop-up. If I want to change the color of the pop-up, I can go into my property editor and I can look at the background style and color. Right now I can see it is a flat color and white. If I go ahead and click on the color selection, I can change it to a different color, something like this. Next, I can see that I can also change the grayout color. Currently, I can see that it is this black color with this opacity. If again, I click on it, I can change it to a different color. I'm going to undo that just so we can look at blur. Remember, I can undo by clicking one time on these two arrows. You can also see that I have a grayout blur. Currently, the grayout blur is 0. If I go up to 5, I can see that the background is much more blurred out. So these are all ways that I can change my styling for my pop-up. Pop-ups have to be triggered. They are invisible by default on your page. Pop-ups can be triggered in various ways. For instance, via workflows when something is clicked, like clicking on a button, or when the user has scrolled to a certain place on the page. Looking at the other containers we can add, we can see floating groups. A floating group is a group that sticks to a particular place on the page. As a user, you will still see the floating group, even if you scroll on the page. Examples of where floating groups are used include headers, footers, and sidebars on dashboards. Let's take a look at some of these examples to make floating groups make a little more sense. Before we show the examples though, we're going to talk about this section over here, which is the Elements tree. The Elements tree helps list all the elements that are on your page. They also show you how those elements are grouped together. So for instance, on this page, I can see I have a floating group header. You can see that the picture comes up when I go by it. If I click on the plus button, I can see which other elements are contained in that same grouping. So in this case, I can see some text. If I want to see that actually appear on the page, I can simply click it. So for instance, I can click on floating group header, and then I can see that comes up. If I click on text, I can see which group I've selected. So I can keep going the same way. So again, I can see that I've got another group on the page, group content. So now that one has come up. I can see within that group, I have a repeating group. So there we go. I can click on that. And again, I can keep exposing or closing the elements to see which things are grouped or where to find them. So for instance, if I look at this page, which is named this, I can see nothing on the page right now because everything is hidden. When we're talking about hidden items, there's two ways to look at it. The first is what I can see or not see as I'm working. So that's whether I have this little button clicked on or off. The second is what I can see as a user on my app. From the user perspective, I'm first going to click on a couple of groups and I'm going to have a look. Now here I've got one group and a second group, so I can see them as the person working on it, but what does my user see? So if we hit preview, I can see that I see this group, but I don't see the red sidebar. So why is that? Well, let's go look back on the bubble editor side. So if we double click on the first group, which I could see, and I look at its property editor, I can see that there's a line that says this element is visible on page load, and it's checked. So that's why I'm seeing it. This will be the default for elements, meaning they will usually be visible, and if you don't want them to be shown, you have to unclick this. Next, if I look at the sidebar, I can see that in that same line, this element is visible on page load. It is not selected, so I didn't see it as a user. So we are going to go ahead and now talk about floating groups. So the first one we have here is a floating group sidebar. So something where we wanted a bar to stay on the side at all times where we're scrolling up and down the page. So we're going to make it visible on page load so we're able to see it. And then if you look at the property editor for these things, you can see there's two things that are really important. So first is where it's going to float. So here, vertically, it's going to float relative to both. So if you look at my options, I can float this to the top, I can float this to the bottom, I can float this to both or nothing. So these are the important ones. So again, in this case, we're floating to both because we want it to be on the side, and then we get a choice of whether we want to float something to the left or the right. So if we go ahead and preview this, we can see what this looks like. So we can see we've got both groups, and we can see that this side of the page with this group is moving while this group isn't, which is what we're after. Looking at the container section, we next see group focus. Group focus is a group that is referenced or linked to another element on the page and appears attached or close to it. Common use cases for using group focus are menu bars and clickable help or tip icons like this. To add a new group focus to the page, select it, draw it on the page. Initially, it will always put the box at the top corner because it doesn't know what it's referenced to yet. Then after that, you can select the reference item. So for instance, in this case, if I select a header, then it will be referenced to that. Let's look at a couple of group focuses we have already created. So the first one is here, and we can see we have its property editor opened up as well. We can see that the reference element in this case is actually this icon, so icon clips. And then we can see we have offset the top by 25 and we've offset the left by -10. We can see within this group focus, we have added another element, which is a text element, to put in the words. So here we have a second example of using group focus. In this case, we have the group focus and it is referencing group question. So group question is actually this whole group. Next, we can see when we click back on the group focus itself, we have offset the top by -80, we've offset the left by 180. Now, what happens with group focus is group focus will not automatically show. It is something that will need to be triggered with a workflow and will be hidden by default. We will talk about triggering this more when we talk about workflows in the workflow videos. Finishing up with the container section, we can see after group focus, there is another install more button. Again, this allows us to get plugins. We're going to go ahead and close the container section and make one final comment on the elements tree. When the elements tree is first opened, you can see everything that is there, whether it's hidden or visible to your user on page load. If you only want to see the hideable items or hidden items, you can check this box. That may make it easier to figure out what a user can or can't see. We're now going to go ahead and close that as well. We are next going to move on to the reusable elements. Reusable elements are elements you build once that you can reuse in multiple places in your app. Not only do they contain design elements like groups and visual elements, but they can also contain workflows. So you can have the design element plus the instructions for when or how to do something. When you make changes to a reusable element, the changes are automatically updated everywhere that particular reusable element is used throughout your app. Let's have a look at a few examples from Bubble itself. Looking at the different reusable elements, we can see that Bubble comes with a footer, a header, and a sign-up login pop-up option. We can also see that we can add our own new reusable elements by clicking on this button. First, let's take a look at the footer. So if I select it and I add it to the page, it will be added to the page. Now, unlike my other elements, I cannot directly edit in this. Instead, I need to go to a different area of Bubble. So if we go to the top, I can see all my pages are listed here, and I can see all my reusable elements are listed here. So if I want to make changes to this, I actually need to go and select this page instead, essentially. So from here, I can make edits. Now, if I'm curious if there's workflow associated, I can simply click on the workflow and I can see in the case of the footer, there isn't any. So next we are looking at Bubbles header. As you can see, at the top it says reusable header. So we've opened it up. When we look, we can see all of the elements with other elements in it. So again, if we look at our element tree, we can see that we have one big navigation container. Within that container, we have another container called navigation, which includes groups and so forth. So again, you're seeing a lot of containers within containers of different types. Now, in terms of workflows, we can see if I click on this one, it does in fact have workflows. So we can see that if we click image A, for instance, something happens. Or if we click the sign up or login button, something happens. So again, these are the instructions that go along with it. The last reusable element that comes built in is the sign up login pop-up. As you can see, it looks something like this. So again, on this page, we can go ahead and edit it. And if I want to see the workflows associated with it, I can see them here. Again, the workflows are the instructions that come with that element. Finishing looking at the UI builder, I can go down and I can see element templates. Bubble comes with 2. So with them, you select them. So in this case, we'll select the tab element. You place it on the page. So again, we're going to draw that on, and then the element is going to appear. The difference with the templates is that you will not find them up here in the reusable elements. You cannot add to them, and you are doing all your editing directly within them. They do, however, come with workflows already pre-built. Of course, if we go ahead to preview to see what this would look like, I see this. So I see where, thanks to the workflows, I can go back and forth between these tabs. Let's go back and look at the other option we have for a template. So I can see if I add the sign up login form, my template looks like this. Again, I can edit it. And again, it already comes with workflows built in. If I go ahead and preview it, it will look like this to the user. Before we move on to the responsive tab, let's look a bit more at the property editor first. So here I have selected the property editor for the page itself. That's why you can see this blue line highlighted. All property editors will have features that are similar and features that are different. So first, let's look at the features that are similar. So as we can see, we have an appearance tab, a conditional tab, and a transitions tab. As far as the appearance tab goes, the important part we want to point out right now is that each one will have information related to width and height of the element. So how wide is the element? How high is the element? It will also have information relating to whether this should be fixed width or not. So if something is fixed width, it is always the same size. If something is not fixed width, it moves and changes depending on the screen size. The reason we want to highlight this information is that it relates to responsiveness. Next, you will see the conditional tab. The conditional tab is an if this, then that type of tab. So for instance, if I have a look, I can say when something, then do something. We will look more at this in another video, but that's what this is for. Then we have a transitions tab. So this is helping with animations. So again, how fast something is moving in or out. So for instance, I can see here, I can ease something in over a certain period of time. Next, we've opened up the property editor of this group. So as we can see, it has some of the same features again, appearance, conditionals, transitions. We can see at the top that it has some information related to the type of content. Again, that is a feature that is similar for all property editors. We can see that there's information related to us starting or editing a workflow. So again, instructions related to this particular element. You can see this element is visible on page load, either checked or not checked. Again, very common with most of them. And then again, we see a lot of information related to width and height. So make this element fixed width. So again, Do we keep this element the same size all the time, or is it responsive and changes depending on the size of the screen? If it does, then we can set a minimum width so it can only squeeze down to a certain screen size. We can also apply a max width when the page is stretched so it can only stretch out to a certain page size. These, again, we will work with more, but they're related to responsive and we really want to highlight them right now. Scrolling further, we can see back to width and height. We also have an X and Y value, so we can actually use the X and Y value to place things on the page neatly. And then we have some information related to style. Again, most of the property editors will have something related that way. We just wanted to highlight a few more things with the property editor at the top. So first you will see a bubble. If you click on the bubble, you will see a notes section come up. You can add whatever notes you like as you build. Next, you will see a question mark. If you click on the question mark, some more videos will come up. You see contextual videos, so if there's a video related to the topic, that's where it will come up. And lastly, we can see this little I button. In this case, I stands for inspector or element inspector. And the biggest thing we want to point out here is that here is where you can see and add information related to custom states. What is a custom state? Well, stay tuned, we'll show you in a video, but for now we just want you to know where that is. Next, we are going to introduce you to the responsive tab. We will go into more detail about how to build responsively in another video. First, what we're going to do is we're actually going to make this page fixed width. To do that, we are going to check on make this element page fixed width. The reason we're going to do that is to show you what happens if something is fixed width and we go to look at it in the responsive tab. We can see this message, which basically tells us that we have the page set to fixed width, and this is preventing us from seeing it in a responsive way. So what we have to do is go back and make sure that we have that checked off or not selected. So then we can go back into the responsive tab, and now we can see that this is coming up. Looking at this and going to the bottom, we can see there's hidden elements. So again, I have the option of checking things on or off to see how things are looking on the page. And then I can see at the top here that what I have the option of doing is pushing back to show this in different sizes. And you can see this is changing over here in terms of what pixel size. I also have the option of simply clicking on different devices with different sizes to see how things will look. The last part we want to point out in this section is you can actually set something to work responsibly in certain ways by clicking on the individual element. In this case, for instance, we can see that there's some things related to fixed width, where the margin is, adding hiring rules, that sort of thing. You will also notice that this particular responsive information, it changes depending on the element. So you can see here, we had a different type of element and it's actually showing us some other options. Now you know how to add elements to the page and what the concept of building responsibly means. Congrats!